They had done this dance before twice. In 2022, it was a 2-hour marathon where Kanye called him a Karen and eventually squeezed out a half apology that satisfied no one. In 2025, it lasted 4 minutes before Kanye ripped out his earpiece in Morca and told Piers to circle back when you can count. Now, against all odds, against all advice, against everything that common sense would dictate, they were about to try again. Piers Morgan had called Kanye West a sniveling little coward on international television. Kanye had called Piers a plantation owner with a microphone. And somehow, inexplicably, they had agreed to sit across from each other one more time. What happens when the most controversial man in music faces the most controversial man in media? What happens when neither of them knows how to back down? The answer was about to unfold on Piers Morgan Uncensored. And by the end of it, only one of them would still be in the building. Subscribe now and drop a comment below, because what you're about to witness is the collision that everyone saw coming, but no one could look away from. The Piers Morgan Uncensored studio in London had been transformed for this occasion. Extra security, additional cameras, a palpable tension that the production crew could feel the moment they walked in that morning. Everyone knew this interview could go sideways at any moment. The question wasn't if there would be fireworks. The question was how big the explosion would be. Piers Morgan sat in his chair reviewing his notes with the intensity of a prosecutor preparing closing arguments. At 61 years old, he had built a career on confrontation, on pushing buttons, on asking the questions that other journalists were too polite or too afraid to ask. He had been fired, canceled, praised, and condemned more times than he could count. And he had never once backed down from a fight. Kanye West. At 48 years old, Kanye had achieved everything a musician could achieve. 24 Grammy Awards, billions of dollars in business, a cultural impact that would be studied for generations, and in the past few years, a descent into controversy so complete that even his most devoted fans struggled to defend him. The anti-Semitic tweets, the DEFCON 3 comments, the Hitler praise, the KKK imagery, the White Lives Matter shirts, each scandal more shocking than the last, each apology less convincing than the one before. Kanye had become a case study in how genius and self-destruction could coexist in the same person. "Yay," Piers said as Kanye took his seat across from him. The single syllable carried years of history. "Pice," Kanye replied, his voice flat. "Thank you for coming back. After last time, I wasn't sure you would. Last time, you couldn't count. You said 32 million when I had 33 million followers. That's disrespectful." Piers smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "And you ran away before I could ask you a single substantive question. That's cowardly." The word hung in the air between them. Cowardly. The same word Piers had used on social media after Kanye's Majorca walkout. The word that had started a Twitter war that lasted for weeks. "I didn't run away," Kanye said, his voice getting sharper. "I removed myself from a situation where I wasn't being respected. That's called boundaries." "Boundaries?" Piers laughed, made a career out of having no boundaries. "You've said things about Jewish people that would make actual Nazis uncomfortable. You've praised Hitler on multiple platforms. You wore a KKK hood and called it art. And now you want to talk about boundaries." The studio felt smaller. Suddenly the walls closing in as two massive egos began their collision course. "You see, this is exactly what I'm talking about," Kanye said, leaning forward. "You start every conversation with an attack. You don't want dialogue, you want content. You want clips. You want me to say something crazy so you can play it on a loop for the next week. I want you to explain yourself," Piers shot back. "I want you to look into that camera and tell the millions of people watching why they should take you seriously after everything you've said and done." "That's not an attack. That's journalism." "Journalism?" Kanye's laugh bitter. "You're not a journalist, Piers. You're a provocator. You're the British version of what you accuse me of being. You say outrageous things for attention, and then you act shocked when other people do the same thing." The accusations seemed to land. Piers's jaw tightened, and for a moment he was silent. "The difference," Piers finally said, his voice controlled but carrying an edge, "is that I've never praised Adolf Hitler. I've never threatened an entire religious group. I've never worn white supremacist symbols and called it fashion. You've said plenty of things that hurt people." Kanye countered. "You just don't get called out for it because you're the one doing the calling out. You've attacked Meghan Markle for years. You've said things about women, about minorities, about anyone who doesn't fit your worldview. But because you have a show and a platform, suddenly that's journalism and not hate. We're not here to talk about me. Why not? Why is it always a one-way interrogation with you? Why do I have to answer for every mistake I've ever made while you get to sit there acting like you're morally superior? Piers leaned back, studying Kanye with an expression that mixed frustration with something that might have been respect for the challenge. Fine, let's talk about both of us. Let's have a real conversation. But that means you actually have to engage instead of running away when it gets uncomfortable. I didn't run away in my orca. You got my follower count wrong. You started the interview by disrespecting me. I got your follower count wrong by 1 million out of 33 million. That's a rounding error, not an insult. It shows you don't do your homework. It shows you don't respect me enough to get the basic facts right. And if you can't get the easy stuff right, why should I trust you with the hard stuff? Piers rubbed his forehead, the frustration visibly building. All right, let me ask you something. And I want a real answer. Not deflection, not whataboutism. A real answer. Can I spread his hands? Ask why Hitler? Of all the things you could have said, of all the historical figures you could have invoked, why did you repeatedly praise Adolf Hitler? A man responsible for the murder of 6 million Jewish people. A man who represents the absolute worst of human evil. Why him? The studio went silent. The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Kanye was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, more contemplative. I was in a dark place. I was off my medication. I was surrounded by people who were telling me what I wanted to hear instead of what I needed to hear. And I was angry. So angry at the world, at industry, at everyone who I felt had wronged me. That's not an answer. That's an excuse. Let me finish. Kanye's voice rose. I'm trying to explain, not justify. There's a difference. Then explain. When you feel like the world is against you. When you feel like there's a conspiracy keeping you down. Your mind goes to dark places. You start looking for explanations. You start believing things that you wouldn't believe if you were thinking clearly. And some of those beliefs, they were wrong. They were deeply, fundamentally wrong. Are you saying you were wrong to praise Hitler? I'm saying that the version of me who said those things was not thinking clearly. That version was sick. That version was lashing out at the world in the most destructive way possible because I wanted people to feel as hurt as I felt. Piers leaned forward. But that's still not taking responsibility. You're describing it like it happened to someone else, like you were possessed. But it was you. Yeah, it was your mouth, your words, your platform. I know. Kanye's voice cracked slightly. I know it was me, and I have to live with that. Every day I have to look at my children and know that someday they're going to Google their father and find out that he said things that align him with monsters. You think I don't carry that? I think you carry it until the next controversy makes you forget. I think you apologize and then do something else that requires a new apology. It's a pattern. Yay. And at some point, the apologies stopped meaning anything. Kanye stood up abruptly, and the movement caused the security guards to shift toward the set. But he wasn't leaving. He was packing. His energy too big for the chair, too big for the studio. You want to talk about patterns? Let's talk about patterns. Let's talk about how the media builds people up just to tear them down. Let's talk about how every Black artist who gets too successful suddenly becomes a target. Let's talk about how the same industry that played my music at their weddings and their children's births now acts like I'm a monster. You're not a victim here. Yay, I'm not saying I'm a victim. I'm saying the situation is more complicated than you want it to be. I'm saying that I can be wrong and be treated unfairly at the same time. Those things can both be true. Piers shook his head. The Jewish community that you attacked, they're the victims. The Holocaust survivors who had to hear you praise the man who tried to exterminate them. They're the victims. You're a billionaire with a platform and an army of fans who will defend anything you do. You're not a victim. My mother died, Piers. Kanye's voice dropped to almost a whisper. My mother died on an operating table while getting surgery that I paid for. You know what that does to a person? You know what it feels like to carry that guilt every single day. The studio fell into a different kind of silence. Not the silence of confrontation, but the silence of unexpected vulnerability. I loved my mother more than anything in this world. She was my rock. She was the one person who could tell me I was wrong and I would actually listen. And when she died, I lost that. I lost my compass. I lost the voice in my head that kept me grounded. Piers's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry for your loss, genuinely. But grief doesn't excuse anti-Semitism. Grief doesn't excuse praising Hitler. I'm not using it as an excuse. I'm using it as an explanation. There's a difference, is there? Because every time you get called out for something, there's always an explanation. The bipolar disorder, the grief, the medication, the industry. At what point is it just you making choices and being responsible for those choices? Kanye sat back down, but his energy remained coiled and intense. You want me to say I'm a bad person? Fine. I've done bad things. I've said bad things. I've hurt people who didn't deserve to be hurt. Is that what you need to hear? I need to hear that you actually understand why what you said was wrong. Not that you regret the consequences, but that you understand the moral weight of praising a genocidal dictator. I understand it. Kanye's voice was heavy. I understand that my words gave comfort to people who hate. I understand that somewhere some kid who was already going down a dark path heard Kanye West praise Hitler and felt validated. I understand that I can't take that back. I can't unsay it. I can only try to do better. Are you doing better? I'm trying. Every day. Some days are harder than others. Piers pulled out a folder and opened it. In January, you apologized in a letter to the Wall Street Journal. You blamed your bipolar disorder and a head injury from your car accident. Do you stand by that apology? I stand by the apology. I'm less sure about the explanation. You called it a stretch. You said my mental health made me a Nazi was too convenient. It did feel convenient. Mental health isn't convenient, Piers. It's messy. It's complicated. It makes you do things that the healthy version of you would never do. But you're right that I can't hide behind it forever. At some point, I have to own what I did regardless of why I did it. Piers closed the folder and looked at Kanye with an expression that mixed skepticism with something approaching understanding. Let me ask you something different. Forget the controversies for a moment. Forget Hitler and the anti-Semitism and all of it. What do you want your legacy to be? When your children's children learn about Kanye West, what do you want them to know? Kanye was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different. Stripped of the bravado, the defensiveness, the confrontational edge. I want them to know that I changed music, that I changed fashion, that I took chances that other people were afraid to take. I want them to know that I came from Chicago with nothing and built something that mattered. He paused, his voice thickening with emotion. And I want them to know that I made mistakes, big ones, ones that I'm not proud of, but that I kept trying to do better. That I didn't give up on myself even when the world gave up on me. Do you think the world has given up on you? Parts of it have. And maybe they're right to. But there are still people who believe in me, who remember what I'm capable of when I'm at my best. And I owe it to them, to my kids, to myself to try to be that version again. Piers leaned back, studying Kanye with renewed interest. That's the most honest thing you've said in any of our interviews. It's easier to be honest when you're not being attacked from the first second. I pushed you because no one else will. Everyone around you either worships you or fears you. Nobody tells you no. Nobody challenges you. And that's how you ended up praising Hitler, because nobody had the courage to look you in the eye and tell you that you were losing yourself. Kanye nodded slowly. You might be right about that. I know I am. You're surrounded by yes-men who see you as a meal ticket. They're not going to stop you from self-destructing because your self-destruction is content for them. It's entertainment. And what are you? You're making content too. This interview is going to get millions of views. The difference is I'm not pretending to be your friend. I'm telling you to your face that you've lost the plot. That's not exploitation. That's honesty. Kanye stood up again, but this time the movement was slower, more deliberate. You know what I realized, Piers? We're more alike than either of us wants to admit. We're both addicted to controversy. We're both willing to burn bridges to make a point. We're both convinced that we're right, and everyone else just doesn't understand. The difference is I haven't praised Hitler. There it is. You can't go 5 minutes without coming back to that because it matters. Because it's not something you can apologize away and move on from. Because there are people who died in concentration camps whose memory you insulted. Kanye's face hardened. And I have to carry that forever. I have to be defined by my worst moments forever. There's no redemption, no possibility that I can change. Redemption requires more than words. It requires action. It requires consistently showing up as a better person, not just apologizing when you get caught and then doing something else. I'm trying, try harder. The exchange had reached a boiling point. It was packing again, his hands gesturing wildly as he spoke. You know what your problem is, Piers? You think you're the moral authority on everything. You think because you have a platform and a British accent, you get to decide who's good and who's bad. But you're not God. You're just a talk show host who got famous by being mean to people. And you're just a rapper who got famous by making good music and then decided that entitled you to be a terrible person. See, that's what you think of me. A terrible person. No nuance, no complexity, just terrible. Your actions have been terrible. That doesn't mean you're irredeemable, but you have to earn redemption. Yay, you can't just demand it. Can I walk toward the camera, looking directly into the lens? I want to say something to the people watching this. Not to Piers, to you. I know I've disappointed you. I know I've said things that made you question whether you can still support me. And I understand if you can't. I understand if the things I said are too much to forgive. His voice cracked. But I'm still here, still trying, still making music, still believing that I can be better than my worst moments. And if you're still willing to give me a chance, I promise I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve it. He turned back to Piers, and there was something different in his eyes now. Not anger, not defensiveness, something closer to resignation. We're done here, Piers. We're not done. I have more questions. We're done because I've said what I needed to say. And staying longer just gives you more ammunition to twist my words and make me look bad. I don't need to make you look bad. Yay, you do that all by yourself. The insult landed and Kanye visibly flinched, but instead of exploding, he just shook his head slowly. You know what the tragedy of all this is? We could have had a real conversation. We could have actually connected. But you're too invested in being the tough guy, the one who holds people accountable, and I'm too defensive to let you in. So we just keep having the same fight over and over again. He removed his microphone and placed it carefully on the table. I hope you get whatever you need out of this, Piers. I hope the views and the clicks and the controversy are worth it. But I'm not going to be your content anymore. I'm not going to keep showing up to be punished for things I've already apologized for. He started walking toward the exit and Piers called after him. That's the third time you've walked out on me. Yay. What does that say about you? Kanye stopped at the door and turned back one final time. It says I know when I'm talking to someone who's already made up their mind. It says I've learned to protect my peace, even if it looks like running away. And it says that maybe, just maybe, I'm finally learning when to shut up. With that, Kanye West walked off the set of Piers Morgan Uncensored for the third time. Leaving behind a studio that felt somehow emptier than before, Piers sat in silence for a moment, then turned to the camera with an expression that mixed triumph with something that might have been respect. Well, there you have it. Kanye West, ladies and gentlemen, still controversial, still complicated, still walking out of interviews before we can finish them. But there was something in his voice that suggested even he wasn't sure who had won this particular battle. Perhaps that was the point. Perhaps in a war between two people who refused to back down, there were no winners, only survivors. The interview would be discussed for weeks. Some would say Piers had been too harsh, too aggressive, too unwilling to let Kanye explain himself. Others would say he hadn't been harsh enough, that he should have pushed harder on the anti-Semitism, the Hitler praise, the ongoing controversies. And Kanye would do what Kanye always did. He would post something cryptic on social media. He would release new music that would force people to reckon with his talent and his flaws simultaneously. He would remain what he had always been. Impossible to ignore, impossible to fully condemn, impossible to fully embrace. That was the tragedy and the triumph of Kanye West. A man whose genius and self-destruction seemed inseparable. A man who could move you to tears with a song and make you cringe with a tweet. A man who, for better or worse, refused to be anything other than exactly who he was. What do you think about this incredible confrontation? Was Piers Morgan out of line, or was he just doing his job? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that will absolutely leave you speechless.